This episode of Fermented Adventure, the podcast, features Brandon Green of Stockyard Cider. We had a sensational time talking with Brandon about his ciders and the whole process of making cider. Be sure to reach out to Brandon and Stockyard Cider and let them know what you thought about the podcast. Cheers! Hello, ladies and gentlemen, craft spirit enthusiasts, and those interested in the intoxicating world of craft distilleries, cideries, meaderies, wineries, and the occasional foray into breweries. It's Rich Shane, and welcome to Fermented Adventure, the podcast, where we bring you the fascinating people that are making the mash, fermenting, distilling, bottling, pouring, and delivering to you some of the finest libations in the world. Before we get started, here are a few housekeeping items. Thank you for bringing the podcast into wherever you are, and whatever you're doing, we truly are grateful that you have chosen to listen and make us part of your day. It would mean the world to us if you left a 5-star review. This helps us climb in the rankings, and it makes it easier for others to find us. Don't hesitate to leave us your comments as well. If the podcast didn't meet your expectations, tell us why. We're always striving to improve. You can find us at fermentedadventure.com. We are on Instagram and Facebook as Fermented Adventure. Email us at fermentedadventure@gmail.com. All right, FA Nation, let's meet our guests. We're here at Stockyard Cider. He's Brandon Green. I'm Rich Shane. Dawn Raniere's here, and this is Fermented Adventure, the podcast. Brandon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Rich. It's great to see you.
Great to see you. We saw each other and met at CiderCon in Chicago. I was thrilled to know there's another cidery in Philadelphia. How did Stockyard Cider get started?
So long story, and I'll try to cut it out as well as I can. But
you can give us the whole 3-hour long story.
Right,
That's
well,
fine.
Here we go. I began making beer and apple wine, so a German Apfelwein, in my closet. We actually used to live in West Philly.
Did you say in your closet?
In my closet. So
okay.
Under the steps, I had this amazing closet, so I could fit several carboys in there. And I was into making beer, but that was a bit of a laborious process. I then had a child, and the amount of time I had for activities as such dwindled. So I learned to make a German Apfelwein, which my partner, she enjoys wine. I'm more of a bubbles guy. I like beer, I love cider, love bubbles. She didn't love the apple wine, and so I tweaked that recipe a little bit and started doing what you do with beer to get it to ferment, do a bottle conditioning on it, and started making my own cider. And I just made it for myself. I would keep cases in the basement. I'd bring them out from time to time with friends, family. I had a good buddy who was making a lot of beer at the time. We would trade bottles, and I just did it as a hobby for a very long time. My wife's cousin, who is the owner of this restaurant, Stockyard, would have occasions, and I would bring beer, I'd bring cider, and he kind of fell in love with my cider. Well, the world brought us from Philadelphia. I'm originally from Chicago, so the world brought us from Philadelphia back to Chicago, my hometown, but my partner, she's from here. So we traveled back there. I was a social worker by trade, still making cider in my closet. And there I got the most amazing closet. I'm not even kidding. It was walk-in, but it was a hallway closet, so it was this weird old apartment building in the city. And I told, I was like, that's my cider closet. I'm making all my cider in there. So her cousin kept contacting me they opened this restaurant about 5 years after we moved to Chicago. He's like, you got to come back and make cider. I said, I got kids, they're in school. I've been doing social work for nearly 20 years now. I'm not changing up careers. But the job I was working in Chicago went from agency to agency to agency, and it was about to go on to his 4th agency, and I said, I'm done. I can't do it. I cannot deal with another agency. So I called him up, and this is about 2017, 2018. I say, you know what? I'm kind of done. I'm burnt out. I know I don't have the passion for it anymore. If you're serious, the restaurant was doing well. If you're serious, I'll move my whole family back from Chicago, back to Philadelphia. But he said, I'm serious. We'll make it happen. So I started traveling here quite a bit. I would bring samples. So I started learning as much as I could about the licensing process in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. I learned that we have to use 75% of the fruit from this state. I think is great for the farmers of this state. It's not as great as a cider maker to be as limited to what you have. So I would get samples of juice. I would travel back to Chicago. I would make them in my closet, and we would sample them, and I would try different yeasts. I would try different ways, fermentation temperatures, and all that fun stuff. So we finally kind of landed on a blend we liked, a yeast, because I was combining yeasts and working with yeast, and so we made the jump. We were being asked by our landlord to sign another year lease, and I kind of looked at my partner. I said, if we're going to do this, now is going to have to be the time. If we lock in for another year, it's kind of, we're going to miss the window. So we talked to the kids. My son was about to start freshman year in high school. We said, we've been talking about this for a while. They were on, but I said, Dad, if this is what you want to do, if this is where your passion lies currently, then let's do it. So we moved back to Pennsylvania, back to the Philadelphia area. We were going to live with in-laws for a little bit of time. I got a job doing something else just to, put money in the bank, all the while working on the space here, because we were going to have to build a cider, and I call it a cider closet. It's an 8x6 room in the basement here that I ferment in, because Pennsylvania Liquor Control Board says it has to be behind a locked door. So we had to build basically a closet for me to ferment in. I can do 275 gallons at one time. We literally have a vehicle that pulls up to the street with a van, and it's got the juice tote in there, and I pump it into my fermenters. I have 5 fermenters down there, and I just pump it into those, and that's how I ferment. So anyway, so we had to, sorry, tangent.
No, see, I'm just following along, and I love the story. I mean, you go to the kids and the family and say, look, we're loading up the truck, and we're moving back to Philly, and they're going to build me a closet, so you're excited. I'm still curious as to how it's not called closet cidering. And I know the building and the sandwich company Stockyard, but I'm thinking, wow, Braden, closet cidery, right?
We definitely kicked that idea around for sure. I like, they had good name recognition in Stockyard as the sandwich company.
Yeah, and I can see that too.
So it was good name recognition. It already had a following. And I also didn't know what people would think of the idea of it's made in a closet. It's even though I'm the cleanest part of, about the entire operation, I wasn't sure what the connotations would be. But anyway, so we built the room. We literally took off, closed the restaurant a couple of days, built that room downstairs, got the license. So we have a limited winery license. So we're licensed as a winery in the state of PA. I know you've heard about that and chatted with a couple of people about that. So we ultimately look to have our own space where there will be some kind of finger food, but not build out a whole new kitchen, but we can kind of cater to our own space. But then that'll be my space where I have nice big stainless steel fermenters and all of the space to really make the product that I want to make.
You touched on experimenting with yeast and different apple varietals. You mentioned something that Pennsylvania requires at least 75% of the apples or the fruit or the juice comes from grown in Pennsylvania. Where are you, are you able to source, or are you finding apple varietals outside of the state that is workable for you? Or are you finding that Pennsylvania growers, orchards are now more accommodating to say, look, I would like to use this apple varietal. Would you be willing to plant some trees? And I realize that's going to be a 2, 3, 4 year process. But as you think to grow, as you're talking about, look, we're going to put it in another space. It's part of our growth plan. Are some of these other question marks into your growth part of the plan too?
Absolutely. Right now we source 100% PA. There is, and that's fruit. So I do a cider where I soak peaches on there. The place I get the peaches, which is Green Meadow Farms, phenomenal farm, very sustainable farming techniques. And later on, I'm going to tell you about this amazing perry that I was able to make from pears from that farm. But so I'm very happy with what I'm able to get right now. I spent a lot of time working with the product that PA makes and learning about it, doing a lot of pH testing. Again, sampling different yeasts, different levels of different yeasts, again, different temperature fermentations. So right now, PA can completely satisfy my 275 gallons at a time, operation.
I'm aware that Pennsylvania grows some amazing apples, so it's not like you're limited to apple varietals, but sometimes you may get a curiosity, or we were at CiderCon, you might hear somebody, or somebody might share and say, hey, Brandon, this is my cider, and you say, wow, I love this. What apples did you use? And like, I would love to get a hold of some of these and put my own spin on it for Stockyard. So, that you're getting 100% of your fruit and your juice from Pennsylvania, doesn't surprise me, but it's almost like being a painter, right? You have the paint sources that you have, but sometimes you'd like to get a different color that maybe that paint store doesn't have, and, source that from somewhere else.
Yeah, for sure. You look at, Maryland, you look at, things further south of here, Virginia, West Virginia, DC even has some great apples going on. I know Ancho's doing a lot in terms of like working with orchards to try to grow the cider apples, the heritage ones that we think of as cider apples. What I'm able to get a hold of right now are basically called your dessert apples. It's hard for me, in terms of my size, to get the bitter sharps, the more, standard cider apples, because they haven't been grown for many, many years, and the people that are growing them like to make their own cider.
Right.
With them,
right.
which I would too if I had that kind of ability, but that I couldn't go to New York that has more of a plentiful, bounty of particularly cider apples, does kind of limit you. But yeah, I mean, I want to make cider with, I would love to import stuff from Washington. I get my stuff pretty fresh. Like basically it's pressed and then it gets piped in and then it gets fermenting in my fermenters within about 24 hours. But I also have to wait sometimes for the larger orchards to do a pressing, because they're not going to fire up their equipment to make one tote, right? They're making hundreds of totes at a time. So I basically get what they're pressing at the time and when I'm ready to ferment it. So, which I enjoy, because while I'd like to have a lot more control, it has helped me let go of that control a little bit, and I get it. I test it. I make decisions based on my previous, experimentations, and then I try to ferment. And so each batch is going to come out just a little bit different. And while that can be a bit of a tough sell for me, that is the nature of the apple. The apple is different. And even if you could scientifically get the same 3 blends at 33.3% in 2019, it's going to be different than 2020. It's just the weather's different. So even as much control as you possibly attempt to enact upon it, you're not necessarily going to make the same cider next year. And I love that. I think that's the beauty of cider. I think that's what makes it so interesting to be involved with. We the first few runs we call them X bottles. We put X's on them, and that's what we sample to see if they're ready. First time you open that X bottle, you have no idea what to expect. And for a while, I was nervous as hell, because it's like, what if it's bad? And I'm not gonna lie, I made some bad ciders. Like, some of the yeast did not work out. They were stressed, and it tastes like nail polish. But for the most part, honing that and letting the apple say, here's what we are. Okay, I know how to work with that. And then you open that and you're excited to try it. You're just like, this, I cannot wait. You smell it. You're like, if it tastes like it smells, like this is going to be a great one.
You've pretty much framed craft for cider perfectly there. Talking about that there's consistent inconsistencies. You have honed your craft of making cider, but there's still times when even the natural fermentation or the process, something doesn't work out right, and that's craft. Mm-hmm. And I think that's wonderful. Who are some of the orchards, or name, if you're allowed to share some of the orchards that you're bringing in your juice from right now, where you're getting that press every time they fire it up?
So there's an orchard. I'm not going to guess. Okay. So it's Beekman's is the orchard. I think it's Pottsville area. I guess I'm not from around here, so I can't quite, I don't know the suburbs all that well.
Gotcha.
I know I've worked in the city for years and years, so I know the city okay, but I think it's out Pottsville way.
So the orchard you're getting is Beekman's.
That's one of our suppliers, and then we get stuff from Three Springs.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so Ben up there making plowmans because he's got lots of apples.
He does, and he's hoarding some for himself too, as you pointed out.
And yeah, he
I get it.
on those cider apples, which is, like I said, I would do the same exact thing.
But the more they plant, the more they have available for other people, and that's fantastic for the industry.
And he's been unbelievably helpful to us getting started. When I first moved out, some of the first test runs, he pulled a van up into that back parking lot there and let me fill by gravity, because I didn't even have a pump, 55-gallon drums, and I had to drive them because they're heavy, and I didn't want to bust the payload of the catering vehicle of the restaurant. So he let me drive them, and he was patient, and he let us fill up another, So he's been incredibly helpful to us, and he's been very generous with his, letting us purchase juice from him and working with us. And, we actually just recently purchased some of the stuff that they would sell at the farmer's market, but it's past due for them. It's not past due for me because I'm going to ferment it. So we actually started this series of one-offs where I bought about 40 gallons of their expired juice. But again, the only reason it's expired is because of the rules of what you can sell at a farmer's market. But for me, I just, it stays nice and cold. I bring it up to temp, pitch my own yeast slurry, and make these experimental batches. So this last one I've got on draft right now, I threw a bunch of blueberries that I picked from Delaware in there, and it's a beautiful color. It has a very interesting flavor. It's unlike any, because I use a completely different yeast strain, and let it kind of wild ferment a little bit, because that wild fermentation is going to come from his pressing. It's already got the yeast from the trees and from the apple skins, and so I let that go for a little while, pitch some yeast on there, threw the blueberries in there, and it's great. It tastes like nothing I've ever made before.
You have such a passion for cider. It comes out exactly how you describe, everything that you do. You mentioned a little bit in the opening about, you like bubbles and things of that nature, but where was it for cider? When did you discover that I love cider and I don't just want to drink it, I want to make it?
So I first had cider. It was Ace, and there was a restaurant at like 23rd, 24th and Fairmount called London Grill. Are you familiar?
Yeah, sadly that's no longer there.
Sadly no longer there, but they had 2 draft lines. So I lived at 17th and Fairmount. There's an old school building there. I lived there with my roommate, the guy who makes the beer. And we would go down for their happy hour, and I would drink the cider. It was sweeter than, I would probably not even recognize it now. It was sweeter than I like, but it wasn't as sweet as, like, the only other thing out was woodchuck. And you couldn't find woodchuck on draft. But this place had one of their ciders and one of their perries on draft. And I'd get 1 or 2 of those, sit out, in the afternoon. They had that outdoor seating right there. And that's when I fell in love with cider. I tried woodchuck. It was too sweet for me. I wasn't a big fan. At one point I had, let's say, Strongbow. They started carrying Strongbow at the local, beer distributor. So we got some of that. That was still a tad too sweet, but then I learned about snake bites and black velvets, and so I started mixing the cider with the beer, and I really enjoyed that. But then when I learned I could make my own, and I learned enough about the process that, you just dry it out, and you bring the sugars all the way down, then you have dry cider. And then I learned about the West Counties in England, and started reading about that and learning as much as I could about that. And I was like, so I can make this at home. Now, it's not going to have the same, obviously, terroir as what they're getting, but it can be my own, and I can make it in my closet and put, make it bubble, throw it in the basement, and have them from time to time. And I learned very early on to bottle, the larger the bottle, the better, because it took less work. And 22 ounces, I'm definitely going to split that with somebody, or I can have 1 or 2 of those on my own, but a bunch of little 12-ounce bottles where, so we bottle most everything in 750s. so people can sit at a table, share it, and enjoy it. But yeah, it was really learning the process that I could replicate a dry cider, which was what I always wanted and didn't realize it until I tried it. And I was like, wait, I can make this at home. And that apple wine was very dry, and that was the whole point of the wine is you dry it out. It's not a dessert wine. It's supposed to be like a good like cheese, savory meat, that kind of thing. But like I said, she just didn't like it, and so I was like, well, I'll make it have bubbles, and that's when I fell in love with it.
I just want you to know, we met at CiderCon, and this is like, now we get to sit down and we get to talk Stockyard Cider, and we get to speak about your passions and your plan, your visions. With all that, what was CiderCon for you? What did that experience mean to you?
Well, it was amazing. So when I was in Chicago and I was talking to my cousin about coming back and starting the cidery, I volunteered for a cider in Chicago. I said, listen, I just want to learn the process. I need to learn the equipment. I can make cider. I don't know how to upscale. I don't know how to do a commercial venture. I don't know the tools, et cetera. So they let me work for free and learn.
That was nice. They let you work for free.
Exactly.
They didn't ask you to pay them to work there. They actually let you work there for free.
And that was very helpful in terms of the equipment. I don't share the same cider vision as that place, and that's fine. But CiderCon happened in Chicago while I was doing that. And so I helped out their cidery as the buses came through, but I didn't get a chance to attend. It just wasn't in the cards. So then we move out here. We get as much up and running as we can, and then COVID hits, and everything completely falls apart, and everything gets put on the back burner. And, for better or for worse, that allowed me a couple of different avenues to work, but it wasn't the best foray into opening a place in the middle of a pandemic. So Richmond wasn't really in the cards, but when I found out that they were going back to Chicago, I said, I've got to get there. And so we were able to take the family. They got to see some of their friends and just enjoy the city that we had moved away from. So there's that whole side of it for me. It was just amazing to get back to the city that I'm from. But I hadn't been to one before. I've been to a couple places around here. I've done a couple of the events. Haven't really been able to, again, between things getting up and running and COVID, it's been a little bit difficult to really connect with the greater cider community. So being able to be there and connect with that greater cider community and see, people like yourselves, passionate, make the trip from here to Chicago just to be around cider and be around what's going on, but then also taking the classes, trying to learn some of the things that I don't even know I don't know, but mainly connecting with people for me. And that's really why I wanted to go. And I met, the people from the cider exchange. And so I was able to attend one of the bottle shares, and that was a lot of fun. That was amazing to me to see all of the different people from all different places. Some were cider makers, some were just enthusiasts, some, were in the industry. And to be able to connect with people like that and just share my cider, but also drink their cider and drink ciders that they love that I've never heard of, and being exposed to so much was just amazing. Like I had an amazing time. I'm not sure if I'm going to make it to Portland or not, but I really want to. But Chicago, I was going to make it to Chicago for sure. And just meeting, and even meeting, the dressers. Like I'd met them before, being able to stand there and talk with them and discuss PA concepts, Philadelphia concepts. That was just, it was amazing for me. It was incredibly helpful. And it's January in Chicago is very cold. I know this, whatever, but it's like, it feels like a dull part of the year in kind of any industry, but like to be ignited in the middle of January, about cider, and then to come back here and bring things I thought of, things I heard about, it was an absolute blast.
of that experience for you, are there things that you've initiated since you have gotten back, or maybe some varietals or some ciders you're working on?
We are currently in the midst of trying to secure a particular single varietal, and I'll keep some of that to myself, but that is what a lot of people are interested in these days. I was interested in it. I found that I enjoy blending and trying to take the best of what's going on with each thing. To be honest, a single varietal intimidates me a little bit because it can have flaws that I feel like you can, with blends and stuff.
You can hide some of that, whether it's some sweetness, acidity.
Right. But again, to challenge myself and to try to come up, do that single varietal and be able to say, hey, we're bringing this single varietal to the market, is definitely something I heard a lot in Chicago was the desire of the single varietal. And of course, obviously, like cider, very much like wine, right? Wine, most of it is not a blend. Most of it is a single varietal, right? So just realize, taking it to its furthering degree. I also really want to make a pet nat because I really enjoy them. Again, bubbles, they're fantastic, but they're also very, very tricky, and they take equipment and they take timing. And I work around a restaurant, so I don't always have the ability to come in at 2 a.m. and bottle because that's when the sugar says it's at the right spot, and I don't have great a temperature control to make sure that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. So, but those two things, yeah, single varietals and trying to get towards our own pet nat are two things I definitely brought back from Chicago.
I think that's for us as consumers, for Dawn and I. This is exciting. This is exciting that you're part of the cider community that's raising the quality and raising the experience for enjoying cider. So let's do this. Let's take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to try some cider.
Sounds like a plan.
Pardon the interruption. If you like what you hear, if you love what you're hearing, please share the podcast. Please take a screenshot of the podcast, post it on your social media, tag us just to let everybody else know about Fermented Adventure, the podcast. We'd be grateful for your help to grow our podcast. We're back, and I'm looking at a bottle that says Stockyard Cider Company #2, and it's a beautiful straw yellow color. You haven't opened it yet, and I know, Brandon, there's some buildup. So talk about this cider we're about to have.
So #2 is one that is considered in our archive. So we sold out of our original run of it. It was bottled in 2021. It has York Imperial, Rome, and Granny Smith. I don't filter anything, so you'll see, obviously, it's got the nice sediment there at the bottom. I also don't add any sulfites. The sulfites are going to be there just by process of fermentation, but I don't add any to it. So this has been sitting for about 2 years. So you're going to discover how it's aged right with me.
And you're going to discover the way this is going to be, how it's going to, as you said, age, but you can leave stuff, maybe a couple more years behind here, right?
Yep, and that's the plan. We obviously bring it out for special occasions such as being on a podcast, but yeah, for different things, we like to bring out something that maybe some people have never had the opportunity to try. So we like to keep a little bit in reserve.
I love that sound. By the way, if you're bringing stuff out for special occasions, every Friday afternoon we'll be doing a podcast here at Stockyard Cider, Stockyard Sandwich and Cidery, and you'll get to try these great archive items. These bubbles are so tiny but so dense. And on the nose, the yeast, there's such a wonderful appley, yeasty smell to it. That didn't even come near my nose. It was about, what would you say, about a foot away, Dawn?
Yeah, about that.
So, here, nose this. All right, so you're trying this for the first time in a while. What are your impressions right off the bat?
I'm getting great bubbles. I love the tightness of them, almost champagne-like. Definitely getting nice. I can definitely taste that Granny Smith, but I always fear the Granny Smith will overwhelm, but I can definitely taste the good parts of the Granny Smith, in my opinion. A little bit of tartness, but also a tad of sweetness. Without, again, that's going to be dry. That's brought all the way down. There's no residual sugar, 0 grams of sugar in this. And yeah, with a kind of a yeasty finish, but not bread-like, more, more like what you smell when bread is proofing, as opposed to what it tastes like afterwards.
If I would say, it almost comes on like a farmhouse cider, where you get some of the, I'm going to say dankness, the dankness in a good way, right? Where you're walking through the orchard and you get to the barn and that idea where the apples have been brought in from the orchard and they're still sitting there, but you get all these flavors in your nose, in the essence of what you're smelling on this. This is, for 2 years or however long this has just been waiting for this moment. Mm-hmm. This is delicious. And this is very sessionable because it's very nuanced. There's so many layers to this. And as you said, tartness. You get lemon on there. Even yes. Lime. There's even some herbaceousness to it where I get some thyme in the flavor profile. And I'm sure this is one of those things we can sit here and enjoy dinner with, or even open up and just pass around the bottle and just sip this and enjoy it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think this has aged well. And it's about 8.6%. So
I was just going to comment on that. After your mouth becomes accustomed to the fruitiness and the apple cider, I'm starting to get that ethanol come into play. And this almost, you touched on how at CiderCon they discussed how ciders and bringing up that level on par with wine. And, we were talking with Eleanor Leger of Eden Ciders. She was just a recent guest on the podcast, talking about the test for the sommelier does not have cider on the test.
I heard that, yeah. And there was something about me that thought I remembered hearing that, but I definitely had forgotten it. And it's shocking to me how, on the other hand, you walk into a place to try to buy cider here in the city, unless it's a quality bottle shop, it's sitting with the seltzers, and it's not, it's definitely not a seltzer, a hard seltzer. So it's tough. It's hard for it to get the respect that it deserves, because it is very much like wine in its complexity, in its process, in its ability to sit for 2 years untouched in a dark, in dark storage, and I put that in the fridge last night,
My take, and even for Dawn, we had a whole conversation from CiderCon, and I continue to want to have this conversation with cider makers, such as yourself, Brandon. Why not cider? Where do you fit in to that raising? Where do you feel your responsibility is? I mean, look, you're working hard here at Stockyard. You're bringing in the apples. You're making the cider. Where do you feel that role is for you to bring about and raise that level of cider? So you don't just see one cider on a restaurant menu, and you start to see, look, this bottle, I would be proud to serve this bottle at a dinner party, or say, hey, this cider is part of my cider collection, and even have some place in a wine list, on a wine list, where these nice restaurants in Philadelphia and throughout the area can say, we have this wonderful cider, and you should try this because it's going to pair well with this. Where do you feel that is your place right now in the cider industry?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I think that I work with a couple of bottle shops in the city. that carry our stuff, and so we try to make sure that they're having it available. So it sits on the shelf next to wine. So down at Cork, it's sitting on the shelf next to some beautiful bottles of wine. At Bloomsday, the fancy wine shop, it's sitting on a shelf with wine. And I think we just need to continue to try to get it into places, get it next to gorgeous bottles of wine and not White Claw, as consistent as we can. But also we need to concern ourselves with packaging, with labeling, making it stand up to those, well thought out, beautiful bottles of Chardonnay or, Merlot that you want to see come to your table when you've got a white tablecloth and, a cloth napkin.
You mentioned that single varietal, and as you just expressed, Chardonnay, Merlot, and with the cider industry, that was a strong discussion about doing these single varietals where if you're a cider drinker, you then have the ability to say, you know what, I had this specific cider and it was this single varietal, and I've really gravitated towards wanting to have and find that. That's the lane, right? I mean, you mentioned your apprehension because it's something you've never done before.
Right.
But if we, as cider consumers, start to find that, all right, this is the one we gravitate towards, this is the one we want to try to find all the time, that gives you the... Does that create even more of a buzz, excitement, a following for cider?
Probably. I definitely think that people look for variety, and if they have the choice between this specific blend, that specific blend, a single varietal, a one-off that we've soaked blueberries in, and the next one I'm going to bring out is our peach. If they,
I'm so glad you didn't tease that and then just not have it.
I think people look for variety, and I'm sure as you go to a restaurant or whatever, some days you're in the mood for a blend. Some days you're in the mood for maybe not cider but wine. But if it's available, and if it's available in a couple of different ways, I think that's when restaurants begin to see its importance. So bringing good quality, different varieties, single varietals, blends, etc., to the market, and having restaurants figure out, like the people going and asking, what cider do you have? Oh, you only have woodchuck, and that, woodchuck is some people's enjoyment, and I don't want to stomp on that at all, but it doesn't happen to me. And when it's the only thing available, it's hard to really push the industry forward. Obviously they've got an enormous budget and an enormous ability to produce and to put out into the world.
And if you're working with a distributor who's bringing the beers in, that may be what they have available. So right. You're almost trying to nudge your way in to one of their taps, or if you're not producing if you're producing 750s, that might be something that the server may bring to the table.
Right.
It may not be something until people look for this bottle. We could order for Dawn and I. We could order that at a bar. We could enjoy that. That's very easy, very sessionable, as I talked about. Even as we're talking, and I go back to this, the mouthfeel is not viscous. It's very thin. And what it does for me is it allows me to enjoy those flavors just pop on the mouth, pop on the tongue. You don't have a lot of tannin that sits and stays with you.
Right. Yep.
It just goes away. And I would say this is, our choice. If we go to a bar and they had this or other expressions of yours like this, I would say, all right, this is where we're going to land. I don't feel, when I have cider, I don't feel bloated. I don't feel overly, I get that beer coma. Dawn and I will talk about it. We'll drink beer.
I do feel bloated and ready to fall asleep after one beer.
Yeah, well, but beer, for whatever reason, we just have, even a lower ABV, 4.5 or 5.5 or something like that, it's something that makes us tired, makes us feel bloated, makes us feel sluggish. The cider doesn't do it for me. So as a consumer, you're producing something that is an alternative that somebody can say, I can drink this whole bottle and I'm good. But now I can eat food and I'm not putting bloated on top of bloated. I'm not putting full on top of full. And I love this. And this is something where I grab this bottle and I'm saying, all right, we're just going to hang out on the back porch, or I'm going to make some fish, or we're going to make something. I think this would even stand up to something spicy.
I was going to say, I actually tasted the second time around with that. I actually picked up on a spice with that, which I actually like. So it kind of blended together with the sparkling
Very nice.
Sweet. Yeah.
The first one you brought out was amazing. Let's raise the bar and bring out something peach.
Let's do it.
So this is the peach that I've heard so much about.
Right. So this is also bottled about a year and a half ago, and it's a different apple blend. So it's got Cameo, Pink Lady, Rome, and Fuji. And then we got about 50 pounds of peaches for one of our fermenters, and we're doing about 50, 60 gallons at a time. And again, long experimentation. I love peaches. I don't want it sweet. I want it to be the essence, and I want it to be a bit dry. So working with that, obviously yeast likes to eat the sugar. When it eats the sugar, it creates alcohol, but it doesn't leave flavor behind, always, right? So it's a bit of a trick to get it to where it's going to taste like this, but I will open it and you let me know what you think.
You mentioned about trying to get flavor, and you also talked about you picked some blueberries before. And I know blueberries can be challenging as well because you have to have so many to draw that flavor out of the blueberry, or else you just don't get blueberry flavor at all.
And we do something where we ensure that the skins are going to be nice and open so that you get a lot of skin contact and a lot of the pulp contact without clogging up. And you'll see there's obviously still some of that residual because we don't filter. However, if you just dumped a bunch of peaches in there, you'd have a mess at the bottom of your fermenter. So we ensure that it gets a ton of skin contact without actually, sitting at the bottom of the fermenter, so that it stays up towards the top so that it doesn't just get lost in the bottom.
I've started to nose this, and again, I'm having that same enjoyable experience as I did with your first cider expression. I'm wondering, for you, Brandon, what do you think the statement of who your cidery is? Or what's that consistent direction that you kind of say, all right, if somebody says, I'd like a Stockyard Cider, what can they expect consistently? What is like that profile of what you'd like that to be?
I more or less want it to be like something you've never tasted before, while still remaining cider. I want to use what the apple gives us to create the best expression of that particular juice. Again, given the sugar content of that juice, given the pH level of that juice, given some of our techniques to, while not filter, but also, as you can see, it's fairly clear up top. That doesn't come from filtering, but we like, we're not going to filter because that's time and equipment and yet another process. But also, that's just how it comes. And, they didn't used to filter it 100 years ago, and it was great, So a very traditional tasting cider while having some interest in some different varieties that people are interested in today, right now, 2023, right? So my methods are traditional. Clearly the bottling is on the traditional side, labeling's on the traditional side. The flavor is going to be on the traditional side, but also using what we have now, all the different techniques we have, all the different yeasts we have available to us, the different nutrients we have available to us to really work with the juice and create something that is just unique to itself. So if you have a number 2, even though number 4 came out, after number 2, it was the same apple blend, they taste completely different. And it's, and I like that. I like that you're going to get something different when you give it a spin.
How did we have to go to Chicago to find you in Philadelphia when you're like a half an hour drive away? Why don't more people know about Stockyard Cider yet? And I don't mean that to say like this is wonderful. And is it just a pandemic that you're coming out of? Is it just the growth plan that you have? Because these 2 ciders are a pleasure. These 2 ciders are a treat. This first one that we had, again, I'd be proud to have that and serve that and drink that and maybe have that in my whole cellar of cider. But the second one, for me, is, wow. Again, why I asked you what that consistent, profile, or that, if I have a cider and I say, oh, that's got to be a Stockyard. I love the tartness to it. I love the acidity. But what is coming off of that for me again is I'm also enjoying the fact that I'm not sitting here. For me today, while I'm enjoying this and other ciders from a tannic standpoint, I enjoy that too. But today, my desire is I don't want to have something too tannic. And you're right in my wheelhouse today. You're like, you planned and you didn't know it, what I desired in a cider. So the flavor here comes, you enjoy it. It doesn't linger too much. But what does linger, which didn't come in the beginning but is starting to come now, is that essence of peach that you talked about.
Excellent.
As that opened, I didn't get a lot of that peach. But as I sip that, it's a little more peach as it comes through. And maybe as it warms up. Yep, I see you hugging your bottle.
Yep. It's a tad colder than I would typically serve it personally. Again, that's the restriction of being in a restaurant, in the kitchen. It's good that their refrigerator is cold.
But I love that you point out, look, what temperature should this be served at? I mean, or the mindset of the temperature, but what you're going to experience as this warms up. We're having that experience now. And more of those, flavors and things come out. That's where this, again, another session, I'm going to overuse that word today. It's going to be our sessionable Stockyard session. I said, how do people, discover, or why haven't they discovered Stockyard? We're here at the sandwich company. We're here at Stockyard Sandwich and Cider. But how do people experience this? How do they try these ciders?
So, mainly it has been difficult with COVID. We also had some starting and stopping with different issues, with the restaurant, with trying to figure out exactly how to source our juice, where to source our juice, how we can consistently create batches and turn them around. Storage becomes an issue. We really tried to get started with what we had available to us. So the growth plan is obviously to be bigger later on, but starting small and bringing to market what we can. And as interest grows, as I meet people at a cider con and then end up on their podcast, hopefully, it'll continue to grow, and Instagram is our main way of advertising. Bringing out new products will be helpful. The entire concept of the one-off series. So where I'm just taking an experimental batch, throwing in the keg and serving it on tap, that's something that we came up with recently to bring people in the door. And then they're like, oh, that was a really good iteration of this. I bet the other bottles are nice, So it's really just having people see this as a place to also enjoy a beverage as opposed to just get a sandwich. Because they've got a great reputation as a sandwich shop because they make phenomenal sandwiches. As a place to come to drink, as you can see, it's not really set up like a bar. So it's really, working with the space, trying to create new avenues, but also now that conferences are happening, gatherings are happening, grabbing our stuff and going to festivals, going to street markets, going to farmers markets, being in as many places as possible as we can, just, being small and being limited, but also trying to garner, a wider audience by being seen in places.
I think from our conversation and getting to know you, Brandon, you've got this methodical plan. And for Mike and Will, it sounds like you're growing with that plan. You're going to stick to it. Obviously, COVID had some other designs. Where I see this, for you with the sandwich, restaurant, this is almost like that gastronomy, where you get these wonderful sandwiches and you pair it with nothing else but this cider. That this is how it's supposed to go. Now, I know, you're going to have some other things on the menu, but if the name says Stockyard and I'm at a sandwich place, I'm going to want to pair it with this cider. Come in, have these wonderful ciders, these wonderful sandwiches, and then leave with a bottle, and now you've got raving fans that are going to either want to come back because they know this is where you're going to be at and have a sandwich with it again. The plan's there. You're in a wonderful fraternity and paternity of cider makers here in Philadelphia. We've got, so many great cideries, for a history of cider from Philadelphia. And, you adding this cider to that group, again, and I talk about this, raises the level of cider. So when we have visitors to the city of Philadelphia and you have neighborhood residents, people that are discovering these different neighborhoods and these neighborhood cideries, this is something where people are going to say, yeah, I know why now more people are wanting a cider. I know why more people are saying, you know what? Cider's it for me right now. This is my thing. This is my, this is why I want a cider. So I'm glad we had to go to Chicago to find you.
Yeah, and I do love the history of cider in the U.S., having Philadelphia as, essentially John Adams, big fan, Ben Franklin, big fan, now they also enjoyed beer, but it really is a place where cider was on the menu more than beer, more than wine in the beginning.
Yes.
And so that to me is fun. It creates a challenge because you're trying to create something in 2023, with a lot different apple than they had in the 1700s here on this soil. But to me, that's fun. To me, it's fun to again, like you had talked about earlier with the craft. That is what I enjoy. I enjoy getting with the juice and trying to learn it and trying to figure out how best to turn it into a nice bubbly cider.
Well, you're doing it. Where should we go to next? Where are you taking us next?
So I'm going to take you to what's going to be released as number 5.
Okay.
It is not released yet, so you're going to get a chance to try that one. And you're going to see the difference between something that was bottled in this era and then something that's been bottled a little bit closer to now.
So now people are going to come back and they're going to be able to experience this very soon.
Correct.
All right, so we've got bottle number 3. And bottle number 3, as I'm looking at it, does not have a label on it because this hasn't been released yet.
That is correct.
All right, so what is in this bottle? You said this is...
This is going to be released as number 5.
Okay.
The blend is similar to what you've had before, but it's from Three Springs. So it's going to be, again, it's going to be its own creation, and it's going to have some of the dessert apples, but also, whatever was squashed at the time. So it is a bit of its own mystery, but I think that you're going to enjoy it. And as I was saying before, bottled sooner, closer to than we just opened it. And I think you'll notice a few things right away.
Oh, man. I get honey on the nose.
Okay.
Right away. It's like that herbaceous honey nose as the bubbles just fly up out of the glass. And then I get citrus on the nose again. So it kind of gives me that understanding this is going to be on that tartness, that acidity of, again, I think that's the characteristic so far of what you've presented.
Say, if you're talking about what makes a Stockyard cider, like it's definitely that tartness, that acidity. You know, there's even some lemon. And you'll get
I was going to say lemon meringue pie. I get that on the nose.
And there's no lemon in there. You know, which I think is brilliant. The apple is just the most fun fruit to play with. You know, I joke that it's either the smartest fruit in the world or the dumbest fruit in the world, because you don't grow a Granny Smith tree from a Granny Smith apple. You know, which blew my, when I learned that there's a fantastic historian in Philadelphia. I believe his name is Mark Turdeau. The history of cider. He's just he's done a lot of research, and he talks about how, you know, you don't plant a Granny Smith seed and grow it could be something different. And it's similar to the grape, again, in terms of the terroir can do it. That's why everything is grafted. If you want a Granny Smith apple tree, you grab a Granny Smith graft, put it on the rootstock, and that's how you grow the Granny Smith. From my best understanding. I am no orchardist, so, you know, orchardists out there, if you say that idiotic, then I'm perfectly fine with that.
Send your emails in.
Yes.
We love to learn, and we don't mind being corrected. I find that Dawn corrects me every day, daily, so it's okay.
But that's my understanding, and I think that's just brilliant, you know, because it keeps itself alive, and it keeps itself different, and it can stand up to different things in the environment, the atmosphere, what happens one rainy season to the next not so rainy season. You know, it's just amazing to me.
So we've gone through this journey of the two expressions prior, and now I'm so enjoying the bitterness on the palate as this finishes. And it almost has an oaky wood quality to the finish. This wasn't barrel aged, not even a little bit. There must be some method to where you're drawing out those tannins, but it almost has a hoppiness to us.
Okay.
It almost has that,
Mm-hmm.
that floral hoppiness finish to it. You could spend a lot of time on this cider, all the ciders, just extracting experiences, flavors, noses, all kinds of things on your cider.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and again, that's so being a similar blend, but from 3 hours west of here, maybe almost 4. I forget how far out they are. Completely different flavor profile. Completely different. And, in my opinion, the bubbles are less tight and a little bit more effervescent. You know, where it's coming out, but I'd sit this on my shelf for about a month or two, you know, and let the bubbles tighten up like those guys are. Personally.
See, we're going to talk bubbles on the podcast today.
Hey.
And you mentioned that right from the beginning, that you enjoy the bubbles. You enjoy the effervescence. And we just had Michelle Cudia of Cudia Cocktail Consultants on the podcast prior to this episode. And one of the things she talked about is the importance of ice. And what I really, learned from that is just the size of ice, the shavings of ice, all these things that play into a cocktail. But what you're talking to me about, Brandon, is that bubbles are so important to the cider, and they're important to your cider.
Yeah, definitely. And, in part driven by Will, who is my cousin in the venture, big fan of bubbles. And he just said, let's do more bubbles. Let's do more bubbles. And I'm a fan of that, but I don't, just his encouragement to continue along that journey. For me, I was like, all right, cool. Because I'm going to go there because I love the bubbles. So we're going to go there. And that's how we got to it. And I think because we have the tartness, because we have that almost lemony, kind of the citrus peel concept going on, I think the bubbles marry really well with it. And it washes over your tongue as you're, and as it goes down your throat, and the smell is coming back up. and you're experiencing it in all different ways because of the way that it's prepared.
This is why, as I'm hearing you speak, and your face lights up, and you just get very consumed in the thoughts that you're having of your just enjoyment and passion for cider. And this is, for me, I'm getting it. I'm understanding why this is such an amazing cider. And I'm really hoping, I don't know how many bottles you brought to Chicago, but I'm hoping and I'm expecting more that you got that kind of feedback. They said, Brandon, wow, this is wonderful, amazing cider. And I just go back to that same comment or that same thought process. More people need to find Stockyard. More people need to know that you're available and have it so that they can, sit back and say, hey, I just want to enjoy this bottle. Now, maybe they resource, this is number 5, right? So get down to Stockyard. What's the release date on this bottle? Do you have an idea?
We haven't decided yet. We're still working on the back labels. But it'll be in the next few weeks.
All right, we'll get you the stickers that say, as heard on Fermented Adventure, the podcast.
There you go.
So it'll be just in time.
Perfect.
But definitely in time for that Memorial Day release, so
absolutely.
You can enjoy it at your barbecues by the beach, if they're allowing you to drink on the beach. Screw it, just drink on the beach. Dawn and I do.
All depends on the container you utilize, correct?
Exactly. 3 ciders so far that have just been so... There's a story here. And each time, like we talked about, it gets a little warmer, more flavor, more profile comes out of this. Where would you like to see... I know you talked about, maybe another location or a more expanded location. Where would you like to see, where's the growth? What's, 5 years Stockyard...
So, what we, given the experimentation, given the multiple releases, what we really, and that's mainly to understand who wants what we're doing. And we've kind of landed on, for now, in our space, working on kegging some, getting those into restaurants that are interested in carrying it, because it's like Sidecar Bar and Grill has us on draft from time to time. There's Slow Hands in, I believe, Westchester, but double check me on that. That has us on from time to time. And I know there's another restaurant or two that has contacted us to put it on draft. So being out there in draft, also coming up with, we're going to do session, and we're going to do, our standard. And we still haven't figured out the names and the labeling of that at this point in time, but we're going to have something that's coming in around 6.9 to 7.2%, and that's going to be the session, and that works for a lot of restaurants on draft, But then we're going to have what we make, what our original recipe, if you will, is coming in around 8.5, 9%, and that's because I started in making wine, but then adding bubbles to it, but really enjoying it, and a bottle. For sitting down at dinner is the perfect, in my opinion, perfect ABV, perfect amount, and then like you were saying, you can still eat after. If I drank a 25-ounce bottle of beer prior to dinner, I'd be struggling, right? But a 25-ounce bottle of the cider, is not going to put you where wine is going to put you, but it's going to, you're going to enjoy it. It's going to feel nice. And then you're still going to be able to enjoy, the cheese plate or, the charcuterie tray and have a great time. So we're going to, try to open up to the session and then the standard. And then again, look at real estate. Look for places where I can have larger tanks. We can produce larger and on a more regular basis and have storage for our product, because storage is an issue.
Yeah, no, you need places, the fermentation tanks, bottling, you just need glass. You also want to open up, let's say, a tap room, so you need seating room.
Exactly. And
absolutely.
So the tap room will be great because, again, we'll do finger foods that, we'll create, and then we'll have all the cider, and then the ability to cater from our restaurant. And so then that will really expand the brand, is having that space where we can do, larger scale things. But in the short term, it's having people come through the door with the expectation of, hey, it's happy hour. We can do a $5 cider pour, and get something that one-off, the blueberry, something that people have never tasted, and that the next one-off is coming, right? So that'll come next, and then people enjoy it. Oh, there's a bottle of 5 available. They can pick that up. And we still got a little bit of peach available. Obviously, 2 sold out. You can't touch it until we tell you can, and then you're going to pay about 25% more than if you'd have come.
I'll tell you what, whatever you're selling that for at 25% more, I would say is a value. So I'm not sure what that price point is, but it's still, to me, something of a value. Now, I see this little guy here. That's the Perry that you did.
Now that's where the story comes in.
As you were explaining that growth point about Stockyard Cider, I almost get a sense of, it's like somebody walking into the Sistine Chapel as Michelangelo is up on that scaffolding, and he's painting, and they're like, Michelangelo, that's an amazing painting you're doing. And he's going, yeah, I'm not sure. I kind of want to make sure this is, I'm not sure if I want to do this yet. It just, in my mind, I'm thinking, wow, Brandon, these ciders they're artistic.
Well, thank you.
And they are creative, and they're complex. So I get a sense of that, again, the growth. Look, I understand it's hard to find real estate, and you need funding, and you need backing. But I want people to know, Stockyard Cider, Stockyard Sandwich Company, if they're not familiar, where do they go geographically to find you? What's your address?
So we're 1541 Spring Garden Street. Open Wednesday through Sunday from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m.
And if they want to look for you, any releases, any social media work, they find you on the Gram or the Facebook?
So the best place to find Stockyard Cider is Stockyard_Cider_Co at Instagram. And that's where we post most of our stuff. And then Stockyard Sandwich, it's Stockyard Philly on Instagram. And that's the best place to go to find out. And they do daily specials that are always released on there. And then they obviously mention any specials that we have or any new releases that we have. So,
all right, you made a face, Dawn. You made like this wow face.
The nose on that is really amazing.
This is so fruity on the nose. There's something I'm gonna work on that and trying to figure out what that nose is. What's your sense about that one?
I know too much.
No, tell me what you know.
Well, so this pear is called the Hosenshank pear. It was thought to be extinct in the world. Green Meadow Farms in Gap, PA, has a single tree on their property.
One tree.
One tree.
This is the one tree.
This is the one tree.
One tree.
And it looks as old as it is because it's several hundred years old. It was given to the first owner of that property by a high-ranking French naval official. It stayed. It grows fruit every other year. The pears look like golf balls. They taste terrible. They never knew what to do with it, what it was. A professor from the University of Michigan came through, said, "Do you have any idea what this is?" They're like, "Not exactly. We know it's, not great to eat, but no, we have no idea." They said, "This is a Hosenshank pear. It was thought to be extinct." They have since attempted to graft it. I believe they have successfully grafted it multiple times, but that tree remains on that property and produces fruit every 2 years. So 2 years ago, or about a year ago, so any which way, it's been fermented. It was fermented for a year, and then I bottled it. It's been in the bottle for about 6 months. So we were able to get, now unfortunately it was one of the hurricanes that had come through with a lot of rain, knocked a lot of the pears down. So what we ended up with is about 40 pounds of the pears. And we ground those up in the basement here, got a fruit press, pressed it ourselves, and we ended up with about 3 gallons of it. So that's one of 30 bottles.
You opened up one of 30 bottles.
I did.
From one tree that really was never, nobody knew was in existence, and even if they did, they didn't know what to do with it. Some professor shows up and says, do you know what you got there? It's like, it's like a barn find. It's like somebody stored that 62 vet in there and forgot about it, and it was under a bunch of hay. That's what this is.
So we call it the Admiral Perry, and we still have about 20 some odd bottles of it.
That's my favorite.
But now that's a single varietal. Go figure, right? That I utilized our kind of very similar yeast.
There is so much to this in flavor and character and person. All right, if this is the one tree, the Hosenshank. Never had it. I'm grateful to share this experience with us, you and Dawn today. This is wonderful.
It's one of a kind. I mean, I know at some point I believe Ben also had some of the Hosenshank pears and did. I've never seen it or I don't know if he ever released it or what he did with it, but I know he had it at some point as well. But this past fruiting we were able to get it, and we thank Ian very much for that because I think what you're tasting is pretty fantastic.
The nose is so fruit, like you almost get. What were those stripe fruit gum sticks?
Fruit stripes? I think it was just
fruit stripes. Is that what it was called?
I think so.
That's what the nose is to me. It's fruit stripes.
It's unbelievably fruit forward.
It is amazingly fruit forward on the nose, but not on the palate.
Right.
Again, if you're like, I know the bottle is such a small bottle, but this is something that I would serve. I get a couple of these and just serve it with dinner and be very intentional about some food pairings with this. Even some pork, like a pork tenderloin. Not something that's going to be overly zingy, right, in that flavor, but just something that mixed well. I say this all the time because I don't want to be cliche. Oh, cider and cheese, because I think there's more to life than cheese and something else.
But a smoked Gouda with that guy right there. That's what I.
No, I'm not. Yeah, there's a. We just talked to Springhouse Spirits, right? And they've got a cheesery guy, a cheese guy. What do they call a cheese person? Let's call him a cheese guy. They got a cheese guy, but he's making some smoked Gouda for them. So the fact that you said smoked Gouda, I'm right there with you. Maybe a little smokiness. Yeah, I love it. All right, you keep ramping up there, Brandon the Michelangelo of cider. You said you had a cocktail. You tease us with that.
I've got a cocktail.
You got a cocktail. All right, bring on the cocktail.
Let's do it.
It's Friday afternoon. It's almost 5 o'clock. I now have a cider cocktail in front of me. This is the perfect way to send our weekend going.
Perfect.
Cheers.
Cheers.
All right, what do we have here, Brandon?
So you're having something we've nicknamed early summer. So it's going to be an elderflower gin, an organic lemon-infused simple syrup made with demerara sugar partially. So it's not to make it too dark and cloudy, the more cane forward sugar. So the simple syrup is made with demerara sugar and white sugar. And then it's got 3 ounces of cider on top of it.
So, what you've done now is you said, look, we've got these great ciders, but don't forget, cider is also a wonderful addition to a cocktail, or it's a cocktail in itself. Instead of using champagne or Prosecco, add a cider. And which one of these ciders did you use?
So I used number 5.
Number 5. That was the unreleased one that
Yep.
people are going to be lining up outside for because they should be, right?
Absolutely.
Dawn's not giving me this back. No, I mean, no, that's okay. So an elderflower gin, 3 ounces of cider. You've got the simple syrup in there. I haven't tried it yet.
Nose it.
I did nose it.
You did, okay.
No, I get the gin, but I also get the effervescence. What the cider does, at least on the nose, is those bubbles just become the transportation vehicle for the gin and those other botanicals in the gin, too. I can see why Dawn didn't want to give this back to me. Wow. And this finishes with a lovely peppery note.
Yep.
This is just tremendous. This is like, thank you. This is like the gift you're sending us off into the world with.
Excellent.
Cocktail. So again, you've made a point to communicate. You got this great cider, and it also is going to stand up in cocktails. Start making cocktails with cider.
Absolutely. And what I love is that it, like you had mentioned earlier, it definitely can take the place of champagne or prosecco in that with the good bubbles, but also just the flavor. It's enough to be there. It's not getting railroaded by the gin. The gin is a fantastic gin, one of my favorites. I could drink too much of it, but and that's why I wanted to develop a cocktail, around that gin, because it just is so good to me. And I tried different things. I tried utilizing gin, but that's an elderflower gin. Blue coat, so it stands up to the cider. The cider stands up to it, and I think they're with the simple syrup, the lemon infused into that simple syrup again with the demerit sugar that's a little more cane, a little more molassesy. It just, to me, it ties all of it together really well.
Yeah.
All right, if Philadelphia Distilling at their bar doesn't have this on their menu, they should. They really should, because this I know that
Delicious.
they make some wonderful, exceptional craft cocktails. Blue Coat and that Philadelphia Distilling bar program is one of the best in the city. This is something that, take a bottle of this number 5 when it comes out and say, hey, this is what the cocktail is that we're making. They'll put that on the bar. It almost has like a little grapefruit nose to it a little bit. And I think that's where the gin and the cider, the acid and that citrus, that tartness coming together. Now, is this a cocktail, if we come to Stockyard again, that we can have on the menu?
It's one that we have released on like a special Friday evening. We used to do kind of a Wednesday oyster thing, but we have happy hour now every day of the week. But it is definitely something that we will throw on Instagram and say, hey, the early summer is available. And we like to do it more in warmer weather. I was promised 65 degrees and sunny, which it looks like it's finally getting there. Which is why I went to this cocktail, because we have a handful that we make, but this one seemed like the right fit for today. And it is my absolute favorite. And I think it just works so well with all the ingredients. It's very easy to make. Not complex. You don't have to do a whole lot of stuff. I use a little French press, Frangelico French press.
I saw you over there. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's easy because that's just one piece. So stir it up real good, pour it out, float the cider on top of it, and, very easy. I like to be here to make the cocktails so that they're made the way that I make them. So it's not available all the time. But we do, especially if there's demand for it, we'll do a special like, hey, this Friday night for happy hour, we're releasing this cocktail. So.
All right, so call ahead. Make sure Brandon's going to be here, making these This has been a treat. I mean, look,
thank you,
I can't say it kept getting better, because you started out with better and you got better and better, but they're all best. I'm still stuck, and I don't want the listener to think that we had to go all the way to Chicago to find Stockyard in Philadelphia. But if you haven't tried Stockyard Cider, if you haven't tried their sandwiches yet here at the sandwich restaurant, and the other items that you said, you said oysters on the menu?
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Friday night, Thursday night, Tuesday night, Saturday night, during the day, all day, come stock up on your cider, grab a nice sandwich, and you got a perfect date night or just a wonderful time to relax. Is there anything we haven't talked about on the podcast that you want listeners to know about Stockyard or you?
No, not necessarily. I appreciate you all coming and enjoying very much. We are small, but we think that we make really good cider. We are available to kind of chat about it, talk about it. I love to educate people. Sometimes, my business partner will tell me that I am over-educating, but depending on the person that walks through the door, they can enjoy the conversation. And I'm usually here Friday nights for the happy hour that we do on Friday nights. So if people are, pinpointing a day that works for them, then, I'm typically here on Fridays and love chatting about the cider, love, sampling things for people. We do have stuff on draft. We didn't break into that, but we do have stuff on draft, and we have, some rotating. Like I said, the one-off will always be on draft, but we do have some rotating things that go through there. So, and also look for us at different restaurants. And like I said, we're going to be doing a session and a more Stockyard Cider, and that'll be. That'll be what should be regularly available, and then again, look for us to open our own place at some point in time.
I'm blown away. I really am. This has been such a wonderful treat, and thank you for your time. Thank you for just hosting us today, and thanks for being a friend of Fermented Adventure. I'm excited for the future of Stockyard Cider, but I'm also excited for the present. And the present is you got to come down here. Don't miss out on grabbing a couple sandwiches, some oysters, whatever they're doing as specials on the menu. And Brandon's back there. Maybe he'll educate you on cider. I think that's important because the more we learn about apples and varietals and methods, the more you raise the level of cider. I'm glad you came out of the closet. I've been dying to say that. But thank you for all that you do. Thank you for your talent, your skill. Thanks for coming back to Philly from Chicago and just giving us here in the Philadelphia area a chance to enjoy these great ciders.
Oh, and thank you very much for your podcast, going and visiting and bringing little places like us, onto other people's minds and hopefully onto their palate.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.